name is Stanislawski. I work for the Ag Utilization Research Institute, better known as AURI, Business Development. And I want to introduce Dr. Jim Anderson, who will be answering some questions after we show you a video on wheat variety, sourdough product analysis for anti-nutrient levels related to digestibility. And what this project is really all about is there are a lot of folks out there who have gluten issues, gluten sensitivity, and then there's the celiacs who have more serious issues relating to that. We've been working on a project that was funded by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture through an Agri grant for the last 3 years. We're going to show you what we've done, what we've been able to accomplish with the video. But I want to thank the partners at Minnesota Wheat, the University of Minnesota research team, the Minnesota wheat growers that help with the project as well. And what you're going to see in the video is some folks here, Charlie Vogel, Scott Swinson, who's the the chairman of the council, Shannon Schlechter, executive director, will be in the video, as well as Sunrise Flour Mill, and Craig and Brian LaPlante from Crookston. So, Melissa, if you would, go ahead and turn the video on, and let's watch this video. It's about 10 minutes long, and then Jim and I will be able to answer some questions that you might have.
Americans are eating less wheat than they have in the last 100 years. While many have decided to avoid grains and gluten altogether, researchers are looking for ways to make wheat products more digestible for consumers and more profitable for farmers.
I remember the early 2000s, the Atkins diet became popular, and you could see that the wheat consumption in the U.S. dropped. Book The Wheat Belly came out, and that was another hit on the use of wheat for consumers in the U.S. So we've got work to do. We want to get to the bottom of this if we can. From there, it'll be our job to promote, educate consumers as to some of the results of this, and this is sort of a first step.
AURI constantly scans the horizon for new solutions to ongoing problems and applies an innovation lens to those areas. Our goal at AURI is to create new market possibilities that create economic opportunities for wheat producers to work wheat into their rotations. We know that wheat digestibility issues have been increasing for the last couple of decades, and we aren't 100% sure as to why. We believe this research could be a solution to the ongoing issue of declining wheat consumption.
Funded through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Growth Research and Innovation Crop Research Grant, this multi-year research project brings together expertise from the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council, the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, and Backwin Foods. Surprisingly, gluten may not be what people are reacting to in wheat products, and particularly for those who suffer from non-celiac gluten sensitivity and irritable bowel syndrome. Excess sugars or fructans and proteins are factors that trigger consumer sensitivities, such as bloating, discomfort, and IBS. These sugars are called FODMAPs and proteins are called ATIs. FODMAPs are present in some common foods, yet best tolerated if less than 0.3 grams per serving, about 2 slices of bread. The research focuses on finding where these potential irritants are in cereal grains and what can be done to reduce them. Dr. James Anderson, a plant breeder with the University of Minnesota, gathered an extensive grain panel.
We wanted to answer that question. What is the role of genetics in this? And specifically, has plant breeding or wheat breeding in particular changed the levels of FODMAPs and ATI?
Cereal grains are divided into 3 categories: ancient, heritage, and modern wheat lines.
So this was a panel of originally 230 lines that we assembled, and we also did DNA sequencing on them. So we basically got a DNA fingerprint of each one of these lines, and then we can use that genetic information to try to correlate that with the ATIs and FODMAPs. The genetic studies showed a fairly complex pattern of inheritance, meaning it's not 1 or 2 genes that are explaining most of the variation for ATI and FODMAPs. Instead, it looks like many genes of minor effect. But we did see about 2x variation in the ATI levels and a 3x variation in the FODMAP levels. What that means for breeding is it's going to be a little bit slower process to make those changes. But there's good methodology, I think, that we can use to make those changes.
Dr. Georgia Knorr, assistant professor in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition at the University of Minnesota, was tasked with analyzing the 200-plus grain samples.
Even though we don't have a direct link, we know some varieties have low FODMAP, so at least the wheat breeders can select those varieties for future breeding. The samples that we had showed this genetic diversity. It looks like samples that inherently have low FODMAPs just have it, and it has not been bred into them. So I think that was a good thing.
There were no discernible trends in ATI or FODMAP levels among wheat varieties developed at the University of Minnesota going back to 1915.
After the DNA analysis of the grain, samples of wheat flour with low FODMAPs and ATIs were sent to Brian LaPlante, a baker with a passion for type 1 sourdough fermentation. LaPlante made over 600 samples of dough which were sent back for analysis to see if the sourdough method would break down the anti-nutrients further.
The fermentation of the samples into sourdough bread resulted in significant reductions in both fructans and ATIs. At 4 hours of fermentation, fructans, which has a degree of polymerization of less than 10, decreased by about 45%. At 12 hours of fermentation, we saw about 70% reduction in the level of fructans. With regards to the ATI levels, we saw about an 18% reduction in ATIs at 4 hours of fermentation. And as the fermentation went on to 12 hours, we saw a 41% reduction. This is still very significant. We have almost about half of the levels of ATIs reduced after 12 hours of fermentation. At least the consumer can do something at home to make their wheat samples or their wheat product a lot more digestible by just fermenting these samples.
The benefit of this research, though, is really hopefully to reverse the trends in the decline of cereal grains. So we need to look at bringing them back into the diet, and how do you do that so it's not reactive? So this research and what we're attempting to do is to make whole grains a staple in the diet again. And it's beneficial for farmers because we can start increasing demand and consumption for cereal grains again, which is so important for the rotational crop purposes. And it needs to be an important part of their profitability too.
And I think this study has allowed us to kind of quantify the changes that occur to these FODMAPs when you do sourdough. I don't think I've really seen a lot of research that have also looked at what we did, like documenting the ATIs and the FODMAPs when you do fermentation. So this is a very good step. It gives us a lot of baseline information for future work.
The main takeaway from this project is that the processing is maybe playing a bigger role than the genetics.
This research impacts everyone in the value chain. Millers of traditional grains say this type of research benefits them by potentially boosting product sales. They say there is a market for easy-to-digest wheat products, and the interest is growing.
And we're happy to see a beginning of interest in the academic and industrial community and the farm community in general in finding out the particulars of really what's going on here, because we've got a lot of customers that this is working for, but we don't know exactly why it's working.
Wheat grain farmers are also eager to promote the benefits of this ancient commodity.
Wheat is actually one of the most nutritious foods you can eat. If you take it right back to the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians and everything, they lived on wheat. They weren't living on meat, they were living on wheat. Wheat is the perfect balanced food. So it's how you grind it and how you process it and how you bake it that you can get the good side of it or you can get the bad side of it.
It's just so exciting to see how this could fundamentally change the entire industry. From the producers receiving better prices for producing a product that consumers want, all the way through the milling process and to the food manufacturers. Taking the wheat and putting it into retail products that's healthier, that's more digestible, and that the consumers want. It's rare in life we see win-win-wins like this. This is really exciting research that I am proud that Minnesota Wheat has been able to be a part of.
Plans are underway to continue to build upon these findings. Phase 2 will focus on wheat varieties identified in Phase 1 to further explore high amylose and fiber content for a lower glycemic index and potentially improve gut health. Complementing high amylose with low FODMAP and low ATI components, coupled with sourdough fermentation processing, may make an even healthier wheat, increase market values, and get cereal grains back on the table.
I want to introduce Dr. Jim Anderson. He was one of the lead researchers on the project. He'll give you some background on the variety work that he did and couple that.
All right, so the project that I'm going to talk about, actually if you come to the breakout session where I talk about wheat varieties, I'll show some slides on it there. But basically what we did is we wanted to take a look at this issue of why people were avoiding wheat, avoiding gluten. So we know that there's different diets. There are celiac, that's about 1% of the population. Some people have allergies to wheat, but then there's a lot of other people, and this is estimated at around 15% of the U.S. population that has sensitivity issues. So they have gastrointestinal issues when they eat wheat. And we actually don't think it's the gluten per se. There may be other things in that starch component of the wheat that's the contributing factor there. So what we're looking at, two particular constituents of the wheat. One is called FODMAPs, which is basically some of the starches and the sugars that are in that grain, and amylase trypsin inhibitors, which is an anti-nutrient factor. So from the breeding side, what we wanted to look at is what are the levels of those FODMAPs and those ATIs in the grain, and have they increased over time? Because we think this, it seems like the sensitivity issues have increased over time. Or is there something that can be done with processing the wheat? So processing is a lot different now than it was, say, pre-World War II, for example. So what we did is we looked at a panel of 200 diverse wheat lines. We did genetic fingerprinting on them. We grew them in the field. George Nor's lab in food science down in St. Paul looked at the FODMAPs, the ATI levels on those. Basically what we found is those levels, that there was variability in there, but those levels had not increased over breeding time. We went back to the early 1900s, so heritage varieties, their FODMAP ATI levels were no different than our modern wheat varieties. So that was kind of a good moment for me, because that tells me that at least the genetics is not to blame. It's probably not a huge factor in it. But there is genetic variation, so we could breed for lower levels of FODMAPs and ATIs if we wanted to go that route. Then on the processing side, working with Brian LaPlante with Backwind Foods, he tried 4 or 12-hour fermentations, so sourdough fermentations. And the good news there was that fermentation reduced the levels of FODMAPs and the level of ATI. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that sourdough fermentation results in wheat products that are better tolerated by consumers. So there's not a whole lot of science behind it, surprisingly little. So this is one of the first projects to kind of verify that yes, sourdough fermentation can reduce the levels of FODMAPs and ATIs. So that's basically where that project ended. The next phase, this was funded by Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We have a proposal into MDA right now to breed for lower FODMAPs and ATIs, but we're also adding in the element of higher amylose, which is higher fiber. So you can buy higher fiber wheat flour in the grocery store now. You may have to look a little bit for it. It's a very small, kind of niche product. But that is something that we want to add in there to make it even a healthier wheat. So higher fiber is good for our digestive system. It also results in a lower glycemic index for the wheat. So basically what we're trying to do is make healthier wheat. It may be kind of a niche product to start with, but we would like to kind of mainstream this idea and continue to breed for this high fiber and possibly lower FODMAPs, lower APIs as well. But I think the real push on that side is going to be for the processing. So is the video on the ARI website? I believe it is. I think you can find it there. So if you go to auri.org and dig around a little bit, you can find this video. But it does a really good job, much better than I did, in kind of explaining the overall project and the implications.
All of you labeled that gluten isn't part of the protein anywhere in the place. Possibly intolerance to the digestive system.
So the gluten is definitely, the gluten is the problem with celiac and the allergy. It could be related to some of the sensitivity issues as well, but biologically it's tough to explain. That's why we're putting the focus on these FODMAPs and ATIs. And other researchers have down that same path. We're not the first to do this. This is just the first time it's been looked at in the spring wheat region.